At the recent G20 meeting in Bali, the Leaders Summit, 3 important speeches were made by 3 critical leaders of the world: Xi Jinping of China, Joko Widodo of Indonesia, and Narendra Modi of India. Some people have said that the G20 may be on its last legs, but I think that these speeches show that is not going to happen, that these leaders are determined to reshape the G20 around the new emerging centres of power in the world, the new fair world order. Let's take a closer look and see what they had to say. Now, the G20, let's do a quick brief recap on what exactly that is. Now, the G20 is a strategic multilateral platform. This is how it describes itself, connecting the world's major developed and emerging economies. It has a key role in economic growth and prosperity, and its members, which I'll flash up on the screen, represent more than 80% of world GDP, 75% of international trade, but 60% of the world population. It began in 1999 as a meeting of finance ministers and has evolved to have a yearly summit of the head of state, as well as a series of other meetings. And every year, the chair of the Leaders Summit, or the chair of the G20, sort of rotates around between different countries. In this year, 2022, the chair of the G20 was Indonesia, so Joko Widodo. Previously in 2021, it was Italy. And next year, in 2023, it will be India. The year after that, Brazil. So this year and the next 2 years, it is some of the key emerging centres of the multipolar world: Indonesia, Brazil, and India. And the actual organisation that goes into these events is really quite astonishing. It is an enormous effort for the host country to put on, and it's a significant, feather in the cap for the chair of the G20 to sort of distinguish themselves on the international stage. I remember a few years back, Australia hosted the G20 Summit, and I think it was fairly early in Tony Abbott's Prime Ministership. Our then Prime Minister Tony Abbott made a bit of a fool of himself by talking about shirt-fronting Vladimir Putin at the G20 meeting in Brisbane, which of course did not happen. So these events require enormous effort, and I'm glad that ultimately a lot of the talk about walkouts and other kind of theatrical stunts at the meeting did not proceed. And of course, the speeches at the G20 are to some degree ceremonial and often highly coded in diplomatic language. So they may not sort of immediately scream out at you as offering major headlines, but if you look at them carefully, there's often very significant messages contained within them, and that's what we're going to do now. Have a look at these 3 key speeches by Joko Widodo from Indonesia, Xi Jinping from China, and Narendra Modi, the incoming chair of the G20 for 2023 from India. And you probably have not heard a whole lot about these speeches on the mainstream news. You might have seen Xi Jinping dress down Justin Trudeau for leaking details of his meetings with Xi Jinping. Or a few photo ops of your national leaders meeting with Joe Biden or with Xi Jinping, but you may not have heard about the actual content of the speeches. So I just want to bring some of that to you all to give you a sense of how this new world order is shaping up. So first of all, let's have a look at Joko Widodo's speech at the opening of the G20 Leaders Summit. Joko Widodo first up. Now, Indonesia is a near neighbour of the country that I live in, Australia. I think the world's largest Muslim country, and it is a democracy that has, had some tough times over the years, but is really sort of moving forward quite significantly at the moment. And so it's quite a significant thing for Joko Widodo to have chaired the Leaders Summit, and I think a significant, it was seen as quite significant also, I think, within Southeast Asia and ASEAN. And his speech starts off, first of all, by recognising the significant effort in just making the meeting happen, because, there's been much talk about whether Putin would attend or whether Russia would attend or whether America and the sort of NATO-affiliated countries would boycott the meeting. And, of course, there's also the significant challenges of the pandemic and the war. But what he kind of tends to then focus on is not so much the conflict itself or the rights and wrongs of that, but he puts great emphasis on the issue of food security, including emphasising the issue of fertiliser and its impact on food security, saying that continuing sanctions and restrictions on fertiliser, which primarily come from Russia and Belarusia, and restricted because of economic sanctions on those countries, could make food security in 2023 worse even than this year. And he quotes, current higher food prices will be even worse and trigger a lack of stocks of food. Fertiliser insecurity can lead to crop failure in several regions around the globe. 48 developing countries with the highest food insecurity will face a serious condition. Moreover, we can also see that the world order and international law faces challenges. So he then goes on to emphasise the importance of bridging diversities and says our success as G20 can only be achieved if all countries, without any exception, perhaps referring to that country that likes to think of itself as the exceptional nation, the United States of America, can reinforce their commitment and work hard to avoid dissenting opinions in order to meet concrete beneficial results of for the world. And he emphasises how the spirit of dialogue is fundamental to Indonesian democracy, and how indeed Indonesia is a democracy, with all the talk of democracies versus autocracies currently in international diplomacy, and how some of that same spirit by which Indonesia integrates the culture of many, like thousands of islands into a form of dialogue and effective, as well as multiple faiths, into a functioning, successful society. And here he makes some key quotes that I think really need to be emphasised about his speech. He says, being responsible means respecting international laws and principles of the UN Charter consistently. Being responsible means creating win-win, not zero-sum situations. That's very similar language to that used by Xi Jinping and other Chinese diplomats. Being responsible here also means we must end the war, and we should not divide the world into parts. Not democracy versus autocracy, not blocks of a new Cold War. Not even blocks like the Quad and AUKUS and all the rest of it. And we must not allow the world to fall into another Cold War. So I would read this speech as, to some degree, Joko Widodo emphasising similar principles to those emphasised by Russia and China in their discussions about the emerging world order. And it may not be insignificant that the former Singaporean diplomat, ambassador to the United Nations, Kishore Mahbubani, met with Joko Widodo shortly before the G20 Leaders Summit, and he has recently produced a sort of free book about the Asian century that collects many of his writings over recent years and is really worth reading, as well as watching some of his video appearances that are very highly critical of America and Europe, I guess, continuing to cling to its sense of primacy and its neglect of fundamental principles of diplomacy that are strong within the Southeast Asian tradition. And I think some of that thinking is evident in Joko Widodo's speech. So that was a bit of a warm-up from Joko Widodo. I think that was quite significant for the G20 Summit. Now let's have a look at Xi Jinping's speech. And Xi Jinping's speech is quite a bit longer than Joko Widodo's speech, as appropriate, I guess, because Joko Widodo's was just like an opening warm-up to the conference. So I will condense it down to some of the key messages that he spoke, many of which really are sort of reinforcing things that he has said in other contexts. And the fact that he was simply restating and reinforcing things, I think, is significant. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention to the fact that Xi Jinping and Joe Biden met in person in Bali. But I don't think there's been a whole lot of change in China's diplomatic positions on most of these issues. So first of all, he talks about key challenges, the many, many challenges facing the world. And he comments that, and here I quote, "Faced with these challenges, it is imperative that all countries embrace the vision of a community with a shared future for mankind and advocate peace, development, and win-win cooperation." Again, that phrase that Joko Widodo used. All countries should replace division with unity, confrontation with cooperation, and exclusion with inclusiveness. All countries should join hands together to answer the question of our times. What is wrong with this world? What should we do about it? So as to tide over difficulties and create a better future together. And again, reportedly, Xi Jinping said to Joe Biden that a true leader does that, works out what is wrong with the world and what should be done about it, and brings his country around behind that. He also emphasizes that we should promote inclusive development with the concept of the global village, and comments, and here I quote, "Drawing ideological lines or promoting group politics and bloc confrontation will only divide the world and hinder global development and human progress. Countries should respect each other, seek common grounds while reserving differences, live together in peace, and promote an open world economy. No one should engage in beggar thy neighbour practices, building a small yard with high fences, or creating closed and exclusive clubs." And of course, that's criticism of the G7, of the liberal rules-based order, of the rhetoric of democracies versus autocracies and of the various sanctions applied to many countries around the world, most notably in recent times, Russia, sanctions applied by America and its various allies. And he emphasises that no nation, that every nation wants a better life, that modernisation is not the gift of a single country. And he comments, front runners in development should sincerely help others develop and provide more global public goods. All major countries should perform their due responsibilities and do their best for the cause of global development. And here he comments on the Chinese diplomatic initiative, the Global Development Initiative, noting that more than 60 countries have joined this initiative, and that he promotes the idea of a more resilient economy, and that all actions like economic sanctions should take much greater care with the potential consequences they have on developing countries. And here he notes in particular that China supports the African Union joining the G20. Now, South Africa is a member of the G20, but of course there are many very, very large countries in Africa that are not. And I think that's a very significant thing, and probably a sign that China is certainly not giving up on the G20. It's probably wanting to rebuild and restructure the G20 around this, the new emerging centres of power in the world. He then comments on the importance of curbing global inflation, again criticising the United States indirectly by saying that developed economies should mitigate the negative spillovers from their monetary policy adjustment and keep their debts at sustainable levels. And I think I've commented in my video on Vladimir Putin's speech at Valdai how he too emphasises the negative consequences for across the world of the sort of inflationary policies and loose spending engaged in by particularly the United States and the European Union in recent years. He talks about a proposal for G20 action on digital innovation and cooperation, looking for open, fair and non-discriminatory environment for the digital economy so as to narrow the north-south digital divide, so a significant thing there. He comments that G20 countries should not provide safe haven to corrupt individuals. That might be a problem for certain Ukrainian oligarchs, let alone some American oligarchs thinking FTX here. And on the international environment, he comments that China has put forward the Global Security Initiative, where the goal is to work with all parties within the spirit of the UN Charter, with the principle of indivisible security and a vision of a common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security arrangement with resolution of disputes through consultation. And again, that principle of indivisible security was one of the key principles emphasised in the various proposals from Russia in late 2021 when it proposed a new arrangement for European security, with NATO sort of drawing back to its sort of 1996-98 borders. And then Xi Jinping focuses on food and security issues, just like Joko Widodo. We must resolutely oppose the attempt to politicise food and energy issues or use them as tools and weapons. Unilateral sanctions must be removed. and restrictions on relevant scientific and technological cooperation must be lifted. And then he comments on the need for a planned approach to the sort of energy transition and climate change. And again, those comments echo similar comments by Vladimir Putin at his Bali speech. And then his concluding paragraph addresses the the Communist Party of China's path for Chinese development, noting that it's recently convened its 20th National Congress, and that China will stay committed to the path of peaceful development, stay committed to deepening reform and opening up, and stay committed to promoting national rejuvenation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. A China marching toward modernization will bring more opportunities to the world, inject stronger momentum for international cooperation, and make a greater contribution to human progress. He's saying there's really no need to contain China or really even to compete with China. If we cooperate with China and allow countries to find their own paths, the world will be a better place. So again, in a way, a lot of that is similar to what Xi Jinping and other Chinese diplomats have said in many forums, but they are very strongly stated there, and they're very strongly stated in the context of, the American rhetoric about the Indo-Pacific and strategic competition and the outrageous actions of Russia and all the rest of it. And I think it probably flags a growing leadership role for China in the emerging multipolar world. Okay, and then the third world leader I'd like to comment on is Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India. Narendra Modi actually makes several speeches at and around the G20 Leaders Summit. He makes a speech about the logo that India is using to, for its year as chair of the G20, which might seem trivial, but in fact that speech is quite significant in terms of India and Narendra Modi articulating his sense of the cultural traditions of India and its role in supporting India's increasing role on the world stage. Then he also makes a speech about food security and energy security, a relatively brief speech on that one, and a speech in relationship to digital transformation, and then finally a speech at the end of the conference where he talks about India's priorities in assuming the chair of the G20 for 2023. And in those closing remarks, he says this: "It is a proud occasion for every Indian to assume the G20 presidency. We will organise G20 meetings in different cities and states of our country. Our guests will get full experience of India's amazing diversity, inclusive traditions, and cultural richness. We wish that all of you will participate in this unique celebration in India, the mother of democracy. Together we will make the G20 a catalyst for global change." So really emphasise that statement, the mother of democracy, and it's something he also spoke about in that first speech on his way to the G20, launching the logo for the G20, India's G20 presidency. Although there are specific, things about war and all that sort of stuff and geopolitics or practical things, let's say, that Modi does emphasise in his various other speeches, I guess in this summary overview, the thing I really wanted to emphasise was that cultural assertiveness and that linking of the Indian cultural traditions to what has been traditionally associated with, Western civilization. So, in his speech on the logo for the G20 Summit, this is what Narendra Modi says. This logo of the G20 is not just a symbol. It's a message. It's a feeling that is in our veins. This is a resolution that has been included in our thinking. The spirit of universal brotherhood that we have been living through the mantra of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is being reflected in this logo. And the theme. In this logo, the lotus flower is depicting India's mythological heritage, our faith, our intellectualism, all these together. The contemplation of Advaita here has been the philosophy of the unity of the living being. Through this logo and theme, we have given the message that this philosophy should become a medium to solve today's global conflicts and dilemmas. Through the G20, India is giving new energy to the global reputation of Buddha's message for freedom from war and Mahatma Gandhi's solution in resistance to violence. Even if the world is in a deep crisis, we can still progress and make the world a better place. In Indian culture, both the goddess of knowledge and prosperity are seated on a lotus. This is what the world needs most today. Shared knowledge that helps us overcome our circumstances and shared prosperity that reaches the last person at the last mile. And then he sort of comments on the sort of numerical sort of symbolism of the lotus having 7 petals and there being 7 continents and 7 notes in music. Presumably he's referring there to the sort of Indian scales. And he sees the role of G20 as more than diplomacy and conferring a major role on India. It is our responsibility to enhance the knowledge of the world with the intellectualism of our thousands of years old culture and the modernity contained in it. The way we have lived the idea of Jagat for centuries and millennia, today we have to bring it alive and present it to the modern world. We have to connect everyone. Everyone has to be made aware of global duties. They have to wake up to their own participation in the future of the world. India's thousands of years old culture has taught us one more thing. When we strive for our progress, we also envision global progress. Today, India is such a rich and living democracy of the world. We also have the values of democracy and a proud tradition in the form of mother of democracy. India has as much diversity as it has uniqueness. This democracy, this diversity, this indigenous approach, this inclusive thinking, this local lifestyle, and these global thoughts. Today, the world is looking at solutions to all its challenges in these ideas. And that then is going to very much inform Modi's approach to the G20 presidency, where he says we will outline our G20 presidency with all the friends of the global south who have been India's co-passengers for decades on the path of development. Our effort will be that there should not be any first world or third world in the world, but only one world. India is working on a vision to bring the whole world together for a common objective for a better future. India has called for a renewable energy revolution in the world with the mantra of one sun, one world, one grid. India has launched a campaign to strengthen global health with the mantra of One Earth, One Health. And now our mantra in G20 is One Earth, One Family, One Future. These ideas of India, these values, pave the way for world welfare. So again, in a way, it sort of harks back to Vladimir Putin's, he's not harking back, but I guess for me it has echoes of Vladimir Putin's speech about the symphony of civilizations and how different cultures around the world, different nations around the world can forge their own path to development and democracy and the kind of society and politics and culture that they want. But the people who have been in charge of the world for since the end of World War II really perhaps need to step back a little bit and allow some of these other these centres of the multipolar world to emerge and blossom, like Narendra Modi's beautiful lotus. So, 3 very significant speeches from Joko Widodo, I guess flagging the importance of Indonesia as both a culture and a democracy, a democracy and a culture of diplomacy that, and also, I guess, not reading the Riot Act, but gently reminding the world that irresponsible economic sanctions are likely to cause, enormous suffering, hunger and death in the developing world. And Xi Jinping reinforcing confidently and strongly the key themes of Chinese diplomacy, many of which echo the key themes of Russian diplomacy and are highly critical of the approach of America, the United States of America, NATO and the liberal rules-based order. And finally, Narendra Modi confidently asserting India's place as, I guess, what some people call a civilizational state, but it's a bit of a grandiose term. I'd say more a great state with a very proud and rich culture, which, as he emphasizes, is a culture of diversity, democracy, and diplomacy. Some people are saying the G20 is on its last legs, that it will be redundant and might break up. I disagree. I think these new centres of power, these new emerging leaders of the multipolar world are likely to strengthen and maintain the G20, even potentially expand its membership to include the African Union. And perhaps it is the exclusive club of the G7 that is more likely to be on its way out. We should all pay more attention to these emerging leaders of the multipolar world. I hope in presenting some of their actual words and their actual speeches that rarely get reported in the mainstream media, that's helped you understand how events are unfolding and perhaps just open your mind out to some different possibilities for diplomacy and culture in whatever country you're viewing from. If you liked this video, please hit that like button, share it, do subscribe if you wish. You can find out more about me in the links below, and I'll also include links to the texts of the various speeches that I've spoken about, English translations of the text, but I'm sure you can also get your own languages translations of the texts if you need the translation through other sources. So thanks for watching.